Okay, and we're back. This time we're here for Homelessness Awareness Day. We have a lot of advocates in the State House for Homelessness Awareness Day. We have one of our colleagues on this committee on Zoom today, Senator Harrison. So I'll just give Sarah Phillips an opportunity to set the stage for us about what we're going to hear and where we stand.
Great. Wonderful. All right. So for the record, I'm Sarah Phillips. I'm the director of the State Office of Economic Opportunity in the Department for Children and Families in the Agency of Human Services. And my job this morning is to lay a foundation for the testimony to follow for Homeless Awareness Day, provide an overview of homeless assistance in Vermont, a little bit of a refresher for some folks, but also I'll touch on a lot of different topics. And happy to come back and answer questions at any time or to go deeper into any of it. So homeless assistance can be sort of a confusing array of terms and topics and resources. We have a bunch of different state programs specifically around homeless assistance. Of course, AHS has a lot of other programs around housing that aren't specific around homelessness, right? Like recovery housing, reentry housing. And then there's a lot of different structures and processes. There's federal funding for homeless assistance. There's the Vermont Council on Homelessness, which is our interagency council meant to really be the place we come together around plans and solutions. Our continuums of care, I'll talk about coordinated entry. You'll hear HMIS probably, that's our management information system. So fundamentally though, it's really important to start with the continuums of care. They're hosting Homeless Awareness Day, right? Chinden Homeless Alliance, Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness. The continuums of care actually administer federal funding. And they're not just a group of advocates or homeless shelter and service providers. It's actually a very broad body of interested parties, including state and local government, that come together. The Vermont Coalition is an umbrella organization, essentially has 11 local homeless coalitions. And I name that because that's really where this conversation at the local level around how we want to see what homelessness looks like in our community, what the gaps are, how we solve it, really needs to happen at those local tables. And so our coalitions do that important work. One of the really important things our continuums of care do is the annual point in time count. This is an annual census count of who is experiencing homelessness in Vermont. This is 2022 data because the 2023 point in time count's actually next week. This looks at a very specific definition of homelessness, right? What we call literal homelessness. It's the state and federal definition. People who are unsheltered, in shelter, in a motel, paid for by a public agency or nonprofit. So last year was about a little over 2,000 households. I think one of the important, point in time count is limited. There's a lot of complaints about it, but it's a really important data source that really, I think, does two things. One is it gives us a good picture of like the diversity of who's experiencing homelessness, right? Too often we can close our eyes and think it's a certain kind of person that's homeless. And really when you look at this, you can see 17% of people homeless are kids, right? You look at, almost a quarter of all families experiencing homelessness are led by a young adult, somebody 24 and younger, right? 10% fleeing domestic violence. So I'm not going to read the slide, but I just think it's important that we think about solutions to homelessness. There's no one answer or tool in our toolbox.
You actually don't have 17% kids up there. I don't
Is
see
there
it.
in
Just a question though, on the previous slide, 50 parenting youth age age, what does that mean?
Oh, households.
Okay, got it.
Parenting youth household, what does that mean?
It means a household where the parent is a young adult, 24 or younger. And so you also have these slides and
yes, great.
Yeah, so you can.
I'm sorry, I see two lines there. I see 221 young adults. All right, and then parenting youth means the young adult is parenting minor children.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. The other important thing the point in time count does is it gives us trends over time, right? And so you can see here in 2021, right, as part of our pandemic response, part of what's happening in housing in Vermont, the way the pandemic exacerbated our housing crisis, right? You see that jump in the number of people experiencing homelessness. That's important because we haven't always been serving 2,000 households in the motel program. And so what's happening right now? So this is data from earlier this week. So most people experiencing homelessness right now are in what's called the DCF Transitional Housing Program. That's about 1,300 households right now. We still have almost 500 households in general assistance emergency housing. That's the motel voucher program that we had before the pandemic. Our emergency shelter system, again, just congregate, non-congregate, semi-congregate, apartments, lots of varieties and models and how we do emergency shelter in the state. That capacity is about, serves about 500 households. And then we also know, based on some unofficial winter counts and communities, we still have about at least 150 people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. So a little bit, just a reminder how we got here. Again, part of our COVID-19 homelessness response in 2020 is that we expanded the motel voucher program to provide non-congregate housing. We also did some other important things. It wasn't the only thing we did in our COVID homeless response, right? But we actually ended that pandemic response in July of last year, and we launched what's called the DCF Transitional Housing Program, which is funded by ERAP, Emergency Rental Assistance Program funds. That program is not accepting new applications. Participants have an occupancy agreement. It's not sort of a motel voucher or night to night. They have to recertify eligibility, and that program is planned to end at the end of March. So that takes us back to an emergency shelter housing network that goes back to this two-part system we have, right? Which is the emergency shelter network, currently 28 different shelters, 23 emergency apartments for families. Our domestic violence shelters often have their own funding to place folks in motels overflow. That capacity is about 525 households that can be served by that network at any point in time. Only 22 of that capacity is seasonal, right? And that's important because if you look pre-COVID, we may have had more overall capacity, but a huge chunk of that was seasonal. So we've done a lot of work to expand capacity, a lot more year-round capacity. We don't have as much seasonal capacity. I threw in there some data in the height of COVID, May 2020, we were down to only about 160 households being served in shelters. So we've done a lot of work to rebuild that program. And then of course, when shelters are full, we overflow into the motel voucher program, which is using its pre-COVID eligibility. Just again, to say, preserving and expanding emergency shelters is a really important strategy. We've invested a lot of funds. Thank you, legislature, for adding funds, appropriating funds to the base budget to increase funding for shelters. We've funded shelter renovations, expanded a lot of capacity, 2 new projects coming online this year, more coming online next year. And the way that we fund shelters is through something called the Housing Opportunity Grant Program. This is administered by OEO. Should have said when I'm saying we today, and mostly it's the collective we, right? It's not all out of our office. This program is out of our office. So I gave you a couple links. You can look at where the funding went this year. You can look at the annual report from last year. It does mostly, you can see it's mostly funding emergency shelter operating expenditures, but more importantly, this program is really how we fund our community-based crisis response system, right? So there's other things we're funding.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
are you, because I've been trying to track down a program that I'm very interested in, which is risk mitigation for
Yeah.
populations coming out of incarceration and maybe expanding that. Maybe that's what I was supposed to talk to you about.
No.
Is your office, do you administer the risk mitigation?
There
program for renters?
is, I think what you're asking about is a statewide rental risk mitigation
Yes.
fund that we're launching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to touch base on that and I'm
Great.
happy to follow up with you. Yep. So I just want to step back though, because I went deep into this topic around emergency shelter and housing, but at the highest level, when we think about solving homelessness, we like to think about these 5 big buckets, these 5 types of housing interventions. Emergency sheltered housing is only one of them, right? And so we have to do work that's about homelessness prevention, keeping people housed. That is so critical at this moment in time in a tight housing market, funding and services to prevent people coming to shelter. We do rapid rehousing, which is time limited rental assistance, some services to get people connected and bridge them to affordable housing. We have permanent supported housing for people with the most severe service needs, wrapped around services, long-term affordable housing. Not everyone needs that, but some people do. And then of course we have all of the ways in Vermont that we need to, and we do make housing affordable for people. And all of those things we need to be investing in them. just mention quickly, I mentioned coordinated entry. Coordinated entry isn't really a program. It's more how we collectively agree to help people get connected to housing help. So we try to put the onus on the system of care to respond and coordinate as opposed to having people knock on a bunch of doors. So if you need a safe, warm place to stay at night, you should call 211 or your shelter. If you have a safe, warm place to stay, but you're in a housing crisis and you need help getting housing resources, coordinated entry is the way that we get you connected. Coordinated entry also gives us a lot of data about who's experiencing homelessness and what their needs are. And it's the way that we also prioritize resources and match people to what they need. I put this slide in here because if you know someone who's experiencing housing crisis in your community, coordinated entry, we made it really clear, this is the agency you refer them to. It's not that they're going to meet all their needs, but it's how you get them connected, and that's their job. Coordinated entry does give us good data, and one of the things we know that's happening right now is not just that more people are experiencing homelessness, but the length of time people are homeless is much, much, much longer, right? In 2020, we didn't have data because of the pandemic, but we just know that that's grown and grown. The other thing I want to say is that people experiencing homelessness isn't a static population. It's not the same people in hotels right now that it was 2 years ago. In fact, we collectively have helped over 3,000 people exit homelessness into permanent housing. A lot of people who are homeless right now, it's the first time they've ever been homeless, and they haven't been homeless for 2 years, right? Some people, there is a group that experience long-term homelessness, but it's not everyone. And so that's an important part of, as we think about the work we're doing some good things.
Sarah, do you, being so close to this, do you have a notion as to why those homeless days are being so dramatically extended?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, we love that metaphor, 3 legs of the stool. I got a little slide in here too, right? Which is to solve homelessness, we need a unit, we need investments in unit, we need rental systems to make it affordable, we need supportive services individualized for that individual. So if somebody can't get all 3 of those, they can't solve their homelessness. Right now, it's the units that are mostly holding us back.
We do have a lot of witnesses, so I think we're gonna have to just.
Yeah, but I think we need to put a pin on that because we, of
Yes,
course, never
agreed.
invested
Yes.
more in all of those
Right.
things either.
And maybe others will speak to
I think so.
why, who have lived
Yeah.
experience. or close to
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm happy to come back. I'm not going to go through all these, but I want to sort of switch gears and say it's not all doom and gloom, right? We've done a lot of good things. We've made a lot of COVID era investments to address homelessness. Most of them, as you can see, are with one-time federal funds. Not all of them. Thank you, legislature, for making some important increases in programs long-term. 3 legs of the stool, right? And the important thing about this is like, you have to have all 3 for it to work, and they have to be in balance, because if they're not in balance, it's tipped and you fall off. And so again, right now, what I hear regularly from people, I think what we're experiencing is the units are the big piece, but it doesn't mean we don't also need to think about rental systems and supportive services. So 3 things the DCF specifically did as part of our housing recovery that I want to highlight for you. One is Rapid Resolution Housing Initiative. We invested a lot of funds, flexible funding for people to address housing barriers. Over 1,100 people use these funds to exit homelessness. This was a really important thing we did, and we carried forward what we learned in flexible funding into how we do that work now. We also had something called the CARES Housing Voucher Program, which helped over 250 families exit homelessness into permanent housing. Those families, it's 12 to 18 months of rental assistance and services. They were able to mostly bridge to a Section 8 permanent housing choice voucher. That's a big success. And then finally, we used Reach Up ERA funds to help reach up households with housing stability broadly, and almost $18 million has gone to support Reach Up households. There's other successes. We've learned on-site services at hotels really matter. AHS has leaned into that with the new care coordination teams. There's a BAA ask on this, so I wanted to highlight that. A lot of local collaboration and coordination. Specifically, we're partnering with the Department of Health and local community organizations to build and enhance healthcare prevention and access for people who are homeless. So some really great work coming out of that. I expect a report in next year we could bring back to you on that.
What is the BAA ask?
The BAA asked for their funding, and the BAA asked for the AHS care coordination teams. I don't know. I'll have to get back to you on the specific amount.
So
Okay.
is that ask being funneled through the human services?
Yes, I would think that's
So Teresa's sending a letter,
Yes.
and so we should get.
Yes, but I can follow up on this specific.
That'd be
amount.
great.
Sorry, I didn't include that today.
That's okay.
And then we do have a great statewide collaboration coordination. I want you to know that AHS and DCF meet multiple times a month with our partners at the State Housing Authority, Housing Conservation Board, Housing Finance Agency, and others to collaborate and coordinate on statewide investments and housing recovery work. We've also made big increases in housing services and rental assistance, right? And we know that that's worked. And finally, again, the legislature in particular, we've leaned into this need to create and expand access to units. So we didn't rest our laurels. Last fall, DCF hosted meetings with housing homeless coalitions around the state to talk about what's next as all the federal funding is winding down. We held a lot of meetings. We talked with more than 300 people. I'm not going to go through the summary of that, but I did provide you a link, and I really encourage you to take the time to read it and to see sort of some of what came out of those meetings. And then finally, kind of looking forward, some things on the horizon. One is we need to lean into how to prevent homelessness in this housing market. So a couple things, we've already right this month added another $500,000 to our housing, our HOP partners who administer financial assistance right through the Housing Opportunity Grant Program to support rental arrears. We're also DCF temporarily expanding the Vermont Rental Subsidy Program to help reach out families. We just launched this month with our partner Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, a replica of that CARES Housing Voucher Program. We're calling it the Home Family Voucher Program. So that is helping 100 families, giving them a voucher. We want every homeless family in the state of Vermont to get a rapid housing voucher, to have 12 to 18 months of rental assistance that can help them bridge to a permanent housing choice voucher. That works, and we want to do that. So this project launched up 100 families. There's a $3 million BAA ask to expand that project to be able to help another 150 families. The Landlord Relief Program, finally, last but not least, this is the statewide rental risk mitigation fund that the legislature appropriated funds to WHEO last year. It's finally launching in February of this year. The State Housing Authority is our partner that's going to administer that. And that's really out there to ensure that landlords who have a real or perceived risk that they believe they're taking on a tenant who has a public subsidy, that there's a place they can go to if things go wrong. And so there'll be more coming on that. We're excited to see that launch. And that was a $5 million one-time appropriation to capitalize that fund. And then finally, we really do need to address zoning and permitting barriers, obviously to affordable housing, but I've highlighted here the need to do it for emergency shelters in particular.
Great. Thank you. I know we have questions about this stuff, but we will have you back in. That's just a preview, and we appreciate that and want to give our witnesses time. So I'm just looking at the clock, and I think if people do maybe 3 to 5 minutes, emphasis on the brevity, and then we will have time for maybe one very brief question on our section for witness. Is it Kara? Yeah. Kara Casey. Is that right?
And I am going to be brief because really what I was asked to do is kind of queue up testimony today and give a little overview. So for the record, my name is Kara Casey. I am the Director of Economic Empowerment at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Thank you for inviting us to speak here today at Homelessness Awareness Day. The Vermont Network is a statewide domestic and sexual violence coalition. We have 15 member organizations that serve every county and every town in Vermont. You may be wondering why I was asked here today to queue this up, and that is because housing is a huge issue that survivors face, a huge barrier in accessing safety. And because of that, I focus a lot of my work on housing. And I am the president of the Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness Board. The Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness is a nonprofit organization that seeks to ensure that people living in Vermont have safe, stable, and affordable housing. And if homelessness does occur, it is brief, rare, and non-recurring. And that those experiencing homelessness are treated with dignity and respect. And Sarah mentioned that there are 2 HUD continuums of care. So the day is sponsored by the Coalition to End Homelessness and the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance. We have a broad membership of housing and homeless service providers, people with lived experience, government agencies. And we conduct a point in time count, help support coordinated entry, and host Homelessness Awareness Day, among our many other activities. Today, we are also joined by the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition because we recognize that we cannot end or prevent homelessness without homes. And you will hear more about that today. And we're also joined by the Vermont Interfaith Action. Our faith leaders, our businesses, healthcare agencies, community partners are integral to the work that we all do. So today we have lined up testimony that we hope that will share a story of what it looks like to be experiencing homelessness here in Vermont, what is actually happening on the ground and what's working, and where we hope to go in the future. And just for your information, there are activities happening throughout the state. So these local continuums, housing continuums are showing up in their communities and hosting many different activities. Veterans are hosting a soup kitchen, and there will also be, there's a demonstration on the State House steps today from the Washington County Coalition, and there will also be a speak out today at noon. So I just wanted to thank you all for allowing us to come in today. My work at the network is, I'm part of our policy team. And so if anything related to survivors comes up in your committee, or something that is related to economic justice that you feel will impact survivors, please feel free to reach out to me as a resource. I hope to be in the committee testifying maybe a few times throughout the session. So thank you so much. And
thank you, Karen.
Senator,
I just wanted to say, I find myself filtering all of this. I've been working with a young woman who I've known for 20 years with two high-risk adolescent sons, who's twice now been living in her car. Domestic violence, because that was the start of her homelessness. She spends all her spare time looking for housing. She has a voucher. You got her last week into a motel. But just the complexity and the frustration and the living in your car, fortunately, it hasn't been that cold. Running out of gas money because you got to keep the car going so you don't freeze. It's just an interesting experience to hear everything we've done, and yet knowing this family. And she has issues, but not some of the usual addiction issues and things you see with people who are chronically homeless. It's should be a good investment.
and we
Boys,
we have the emergency housing voucher program, which may be what this person has, but that was 99 emergency housing vouchers, and we partner with the state housing authority that has those vouchers, so that all 99 of those are geared
she
towards
has Section
survivors.
8, I believe. She's had it for some time.
Yeah, and that's where people are just struggling to be able to use them.
There's no housing.
Yes, yes.
And Kara, I imagine you're gonna help usher people, or I just have a list, and so I'll just count on you all to make sure people get where they think to be in the witness chair, and I'm happy to help with that.
Yes, yes.
Thanks so much, Kara, for helping put this together today. Next on our list is Rick DeAngelis. Lives there.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Rick DeAngelis, and I'm the co-executive director of the Good Samaritan Haven here in Central Vermont. We provide services and shelter to individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And my task today was to share some of what we've learned in providing these services, what we know about people who are in that situation. On page 2, maybe I should start with page 1. Want to give just a little bit of background about Good Sam, and then I'll go right to my main points.
Good.
Over 30 years ago, Good Sam was established and initially operated by volunteers, many from local faith communities. And I want to mention that one of our founding directors was Regis Cummings, husband of Senator Ann Cummings. And still today, the faith communities are very, very important to us in supporting our work. And the goal at that time was modest. It was to provide shelter to a significant but small number of unsheltered persons in Barre Montpelier area, but importantly, to treat shelter guests with dignity and respect. Over the years, the need for shelter and related services steadily grew in Washington County. We squeezed more beds into a very modest shelter building, single-family home in Barre, and we used church basements during the coldest winter months. As Sarah just pointed out, we had a dramatic surge in the number of homelessness that occurred in 2020 and 2021 with the onset of COVID. And it challenged us as a smaller organization to do more. So we developed more shelter beds, year-round shelter beds. We now operate 3 shelters. We provide services in area motels. We offer a street outreach program for the unsheltered. And we also have a COVID testing and vaccination program for people who are homeless. So what's happened in Washington County over the last 3 years, the number of individuals experiencing homelessness has fluctuated between 350 and 450 individuals, either in a motel or shelter or on the streets. And if you look at the rate of homelessness we only have 59,000 people in Washington County. That is a very high rate. And as you compare it to what has historically happened in other states and cities around the country, it's 72 homeless people per 10,000 population. So who are the people in Washington County who are experiencing homelessness? Tragically, about 20% of them are children living in a motel with a parent or parents. And altogether, about 10% of the households experiencing homelessness were families with children. I'm going to talk about adults who are homeless, and about 70% of the adults who are homeless are either by themselves, or in a few cases, they may have a partner that they're experiencing homelessness with. You know, each and every one of these people has their own unique story, but there are some characteristics that really stand out to us and that I'd like to point out to you. Almost 80% of our shelter guests report having a disabling mental health condition. Now, this isn't necessarily a diagnosed condition. It's self-reported. They could be suffering from anxiety or depression, but just the fact that many are stating it's an issue for them, it gives us an idea of the suffering that they're experiencing. You know, in our new shelter, it's called the Welcome Center on the Barre Montpelier Road. It's a 31-bed shelter. In the past 2 weeks, we've had 2 individuals that had to be hospitalized because of suicidal ideation. This is a hard thing for folks. My second point is that 1/3 of our shelter guests report alcohol or drug abuse as a disabling condition. It is a constant challenge for us to keep our guests and staff safe in an environment where there's widespread abuse of substances. We definitely need more recovery options for everyone, especially for people experiencing homelessness. My third point is we have observed that there are a growing number of older persons experiencing homelessness in central Vermont, and we think nationally. Since the opening of the Welcome Center with 31 beds in July, over 1/3 of our guests are over 60 years of age. At the Hilltop Inn, which is the hotel that we have staff at, about 1/4 of the guests there are over 60 years of age. So many, not all, but many of these older folks, they have serious health concerns, compromised mobility, respiratory conditions, dementia are not uncommon. So think about it. The streets or the shelter is a very difficult place to be for an aging person. My fourth point, the number of individuals living on the streets, the unsheltered homeless, or some people call them rough sleepers, has risen dramatically in recent years in Washington County and nationally. We counted 86 unsheltered homeless in our region in September. The rough sleepers are more likely to have significant physical, behavioral, and mental health challenges. It's difficult for us to house some of these folks in our own shelters and to make it work for all concerned. We need a more refined strategy for helping this population. The final point that I want to make is that we observe that many of our shelter guests, they may have very limited or non-existent support systems, families, friends, others. You know, homelessness for them is the great loneliness. Like about all of us, they need friendship, community, and connection. As I think about this issue, I recall there's a famous phrase from there's a Lawrence Mill Worker strike of 1912, the Bread and Roses strike. And the slogan was bread for all and roses too. And what they mean by that, and the reason I chose that is because yes, we have to find solutions to homelessness. We need that stool, but we also need to support each person's heart and dignity and the connection they have with each other. So let's keep that in mind together with everything else. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure being here today.
Just a quick question, Rick. Hi.
Yeah.
Allison Clarkson. Not all of us know you as well as Anne. Just curious, 80%, we all know it's a huge percent of mental health needs and disabilities in our homeless population. I'm just curious what you find, and these are people who probably live with that their whole lives. Maybe not, maybe it's
a
new
mix.
trauma, but most of them have probably had trauma for a long time.
Could be.
So would you say that there's any common element that you've observed or that is the final trigger from being housed to being unhoused, given they've probably lived with these conditions for a while?
Well, I would say, I mean, this is non-scientific. This is my observation.
Yeah, that's, I'm asking for your observation.
That it's not the mental illness that has triggered the homelessness. It may be a factor, but I think most people who report that they have a mental health condition, it's probably in most cases anxiety or depression, and it has to do with their situation. Here I am, you know, my life is a mess. I have nowhere to go. I have no one to rely on. Gee whiz, we'd all be anxious or depressed in that situation.
True. So then what are the triggers?
I think that is the most common mental health condition. Sure, there are people with schizophrenia, you know, and bipolar disorder in our shelters as well, but it's the whole range of mental suffering, really.
Right, but then what's the trigger from being housed to being unhoused? What is the final straw that you're observing that is the reason people move from living with anxiety in a house and then not in a house?
You know, that's a $24 million question.
That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah. I would say it's the housing market. That's my next.
Right, yes, yeah.
But if they're,
Senator Cookson, I want to give everyone their 5 minutes.
Understood.
The landlords are evicting people.
Thanks so much, thank you, Rich.
Sure.
So I have Clyde DeVoid next on my list. Do we know where people are? I will go to Star, or I'm sorry, you're here. I see Star, and are you also on our witness list?
Yes, Kathy Hartwell.
Oh, you're next on the list. Okay, no, Kathy, please go ahead. We'll
Okay.
go to you. Thank you. I started checking people off because I knew we might have to jump around and stuff. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kathy Hartwell, as I just mentioned. And I work at the Family Center of Washington County. We're a designated parent-child center here in central Vermont. And I am mostly here to talk to you about housing partnerships today, but I want to give you just a smidge of background about who we are and what we do at the Family Center in terms of housing. Probably around 7 years ago, I might have that a little bit off, but probably around 7 years ago, we received our first grant from the Office of Economic Opportunity, where Sarah works, to administer a family supportive housing program. And so that's where our housing programming started. I've been working with and in that program for that amount of time. We've expanded to other programs as well. And so now we have a small but mighty staff that works with families who are pregnant or parenting and experiencing homelessness in our catchment area in Washington County. We do that in a number of ways, but in order to better serve the participants that we work with, in 2015, we entered into a partnership with Down Street Housing and Community Development, and I'm guessing that most of you have heard their name because they're, despite wherever you are in the state, you've probably heard them. They're an affordable housing provider here in central Vermont, and they sort of branch out a little bit into a few other areas. I want to talk to you about a little bit about like what it takes to keep a housing partnership sort of successful, because we really feel like that is inherent and integral to helping to end homelessness. We're successful because we have a shared commitment to serve our community and those experiencing homelessness. Down Street's mission is to provide affordable housing, and ours is to house this population, and so that makes it a perfect fit. That's not to say that it doesn't take work. Any partnership takes work. Any relationship takes work. We've engaged in a mutually beneficial memorandum of understanding that is very clear regarding each partner's responsibilities. This keeps our individual organizational roles in check and provides us all with an understanding of where our desires may run up against programmatic or organizational barriers. In some cases, we can alleviate those barriers, and in others, we have to just acknowledge that we're all doing the best we can with the constraints that we have to effectively serve as many families as possible. Down Street definitely provides housing with a heart, and we endeavor to provide services in the same manner. To that end, we meet very regularly and sort of outlining sort of the ways in which our partnership has been successful. We talk about the clients, the participants that we have in common, the tenants that we have in common. We talk about potential vacancies. We talk about all kinds of things that can impact the folks that we can house and the folks that are housed and that need to remain housed, and maybe some issues that can come up as a result of things that happen in anybody's life. So in one instance, we had a family of three, a mom and two children, who were housed in a Down Street unit. This family was succeeding and experiencing a lot of success, paying rent on time, being a good neighbor, keeping a nice apartment, saving some money, working on education. They were really sort of making those steps that we all hope to see and that they wanted to see in setting their own goals. Something changed suddenly, and the first person to really notice it was the property manager. And the property manager reached out to us because we have this partnership, and it's well known to everybody, the tenant included, that we communicate. And we were able to really plug in to that family and offer them the support that they needed to get through what luckily ended up being a bump in the road and not necessarily an end of that housing road. The case manager was able to engage regarding getting them more connection to community, and that was the impetus for them to make some changes in what was going on at the time. They also left that situation with a boost of self-esteem that comes from having successfully gotten themselves out of a situation, maybe with a little assistance, but also they did it. You know, they're the masters of their fate as well. Without that work, that partnership, that ability to pick up the phone and know that there's somebody on the other side to answer that call and at least strategize, even if we can't make the resolution that we all want to happen, that could have turned out really differently and does in a lot of cases. One of the things that Sarah talked about, you know, the three legs of the stool, and that we need those services as well as the units, and that's all very true. And the truth is they all need to work. And we desperately need units right now, but also focusing on those partnerships that we need to have to make that whole system work so that we're not having to do as much prevention work, right? Maybe we've got people successfully housed and supported in the ways that they need to be supported.
We are getting close to time if we do
I
have
just-
the witnesses.
Thank you. And sometimes things don't work out, and despite everyone's best efforts. And this is when our ideals and partnership truly come into play. A housing partner takes on liability when they take on a tenant. And I just want to put a plug in here for the risk mitigation funds that are coming up, coming into fruition statewide. My guess is those are fantastic. They're one-time funds. I just want to put a plug in that they're likely going to be necessary in the long term to stabilize that stool. I want to thank you for all you do, and as always, I'm happy to come back if you have any other questions.
Thanks, Kathy. And if we have more time and
We're good.
fewer witnesses, we'll return, especially Rick, I didn't mean to cut you off as you were talking about the housing market as well. The next person I see that's next on the list is Star Garden. Star, are you ready?
Also, that's fine, and also the earlier person is with Heidi Lacy.
Oh, great. Okay, that wasn't clear to me. So folks also might want to change their names on the screen as a cue to help me know how to go in the right order. But Star, we'll go to you because I just, I had said your name. Then Heidi, you're on deck. Voices for Vermont's Children, you're on, or Voices Against Violence, sorry, you're on deck. Thank you, Star, for being flexible.
Can you hear me? I'm having some technical difficulties with my camera.
We can hear you. I think it's okay if we turn, yeah, you're allowed to have your camera off and testify.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, oh no.
We saw your wonderful face.
Northeast Kingdom. What can I tell you? Okay, for the record, I am Star Barden, the Housing Navigator, Landlord Liaison for the Northeast Kingdom Youth Services and based in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. I'm an advocate for the homeless youth ages 16 through 24 in Caledonia and Southern Essex counties. Availability of affordable housing is a significant barrier for the youth that I work with. I have been an advocate for more than 3 years, and there has been little to no change on the availability of affordable housing in this area. The youth bring with them a special set of barriers to housing. They have very little to no credit, no landlord references, no transportation, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of mental health issues and other issues. These youth I work with want to stay in their own neighborhood, but housing in Vermont is very hard to find. I work with the housing models such as the rapid rehousing in order to help overcome some of those barriers and support youth in gaining and maintaining stable and affordable housing. I have an ongoing caseload of anywhere from 10 to 30 and only offered 6 rapid rehousing vouchers, which are not nearly enough to cover all that is needed in this area. I have one youth that is still in search mode for a non-existent apartment in the NEK, and they are on their 2nd subsidy extension. The subsidy contract is good for 120 days to start, then each extension is good for 60 days, and they are allowed up to 4 extensions. This participant has been in search mode for more than 240 days with no apartment in sight yet in this area. Housing First is incorporated within the Youth Housing Demonstration Program, which is a housing program funded by HUD to the Vermont Coalition of Runaway and Homeless Youth Programs, helping the youth navigate housing in Vermont. Rapid rehousing vouchers utilize Housing First, which is supposed to immediately end homelessness by supporting youth to locate independent apartments, as well as subsidized and project-based apartments in the community. They are provided 24 months wraparound supports, including service coordination, referrals to such community supports as drug and alcohol counseling, employment support, and any other community services they may need while they're housed with the rapid rehousing program. The rapid rehousing pays to get them into the apartment and a portion of the rent based on their income at the time. There is even a 6-month aftercare program that offers supports after the 24 months are over. During this time, I work with them to apply for the Housing Choice Voucher, otherwise known as the Section 8 voucher or a similar voucher. There's other vouchers available, or their own sustainability. Some of them come off the vouchers and actually are able to sustain on their own to remain permanently housed. Rapid rehousing is a housing first intervention that empowers young people with a lease in their own name and its corresponding responsibilities. Wraparound services and case managements promote skill sets grounded in independence so that youth can have the agency and tools to maintain and secure stable housing on their own afterwards. Vermont's homeless youth cannot take advantage of these rental assistance funds when there is historically low affordable rental housing availability. I urge you to continue working to invest in creating more affordable housing and decreasing barriers to creating more housing in our communities. And I thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Star. Thank you. Heidi or Clyde on the same screen? Oh, great. Okay.
Hello. So my name is Nellie Pierce. The Zoom name is totally inaccurate, but I'm an employee at the Charterhouse. Clyde right here with me. So I'm gonna just turn it over to him.
Hi, Clyde.
Hi, how are we doing this morning?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Can't complain, I guess, right? First off, I'd like to say good morning to all the senators and thank you for having me, be able to speak to you this morning. First, I'd like to address that I became homeless when I got divorced and I was unemployed due to a bad back problem. I lacked money and was unable to work. And I had signed my house over to my ex-wife. It's been quite an experience. I never thought it would happen to me, but I've been homeless for about 2 years now. I went from staying from my friend's house for a month to hotels in Rutland, New Haven. I actually got in touch with Heidi at Charterhouse here. It's been a good experience here at Charterhouse. Heidi has been helpful, and all the employees here at Charterhouse are very nice people. It's been not a walk in the park, I can say that much, but in a lot of ways, I've made a lot of friends, and it's more like a family setting here. When I think about it, what would I do to reduce homelessness? This is what comes to my mind. We need more funding and availability of affordable housing in Middlebury. And, many of the college students take most of the apartments here in Middlebury, even though they have dorms available. That keeps more homeless people from being able to get into apartments. Help people become more stable so that we can be housed, and people sometimes lose their benefits like myself, which leaves them vulnerable positions that, are not good. We have to refile, and that takes forever. Benefits for homeless people should be more secure. Give people some money to get started on their own, for their own apartments, more availability for vouchers possibly. In Vermont, landlords can charge whatever they want. I would believe in something like a locked rent control, which would put limits on rent of what they can charge for the accessibility for more affordable to low income Vermonters here. Landlords can charge $1,500 a month and up for a place that is run down and doesn't include utilities. Figured first month, last month, and security deposit at $1,500 even. What homeless Vermonter can actually afford to get into a place like that. So we need more affordable low-income housing for the low-income Vermonters here. We've got an Act 250, and why not an Act 251? I don't know if it existed, but if it doesn't, why not an Act 251? Something that would be, more for the homeless of the state of Vermont. So I speak to you with a heavy heart on this subject. I do believe that, Vermont can do a little more to help out with the homeless. So, that's my statement.
So we appreciate that, and it's really, it's brave to speak to your own experience and break the stigma that often comes with talking about a lack of housing in your own personal life. So thank you. Do members of the committee have questions? When you think about your next steps, is there a program, a person, an opportunity that you think will be the most helpful? What is working for you?
Well, right now I'm signed on to some rental things to hopefully hope something will come available. The availability is very low right now. Like I said, here in Addison County, we have the college, which is right now when they're in session with school, the apartments are very shallow here in Addison County. We do not have enough complexes here in the Addison County for low-income people. And I think that's what's really hurting most of the state of Vermont as well.
I really appreciate you said Act 251. I like that. And, I think there was recently an article in the Atlantic or a large publication that said, if everyone's going for the same houses, it's a game of musical chairs, and the people who have the least resources are going to lose that game. So I absolutely hear what you're saying. Anything else you wanted to add, Clyde, while you have a bunch of senators listening?
Well, like I said, I do believe that I believe in my senators and I believe in my representatives of the state of Vermont. And I do believe that you guys are hearing what we're saying, and I'm just hoping maybe that Act 251 might come into play where we can build some new low-income housing developments that would be helpful for all of us.
Thank you.
So I'm just curious, Clyde, where are you working currently?
I'm disabled, and I currently had lost my Social Security temporarily until February. So right now I'm just disabled. I have a very bad back. I've had 5 surgeries done on it, and I'm due for 1 more next spring. So I am unable to work right now, and I may never be able to work again.
Yeah. Well, we wish you well with your health, and we appreciate. So can you say again, because we have Voices Against Violence, but are you staying at the John Graham shelter? Is that right?
It's a charter house. Or charter house.
He said it was.
Okay, I missed that. So, I mean, and seems like Charter House is working and is giving you the stability to try and rebuild and take care of yourself. So we appreciate. Yeah, we appreciate.
Heidi's done a great help, and the staff is great here too.
Great, that's wonderful. We'll have to make our own visits to see you all, but thank you so much for helping to tell that story, and we really, really appreciate you being with us, Clyde.
Okay, thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Okay, I'll say the next names I have. Kim is the next person that I have from this list, but Stephanie Kimball or Jenny Davis, if you're out there. Okay, Kim, we'll go to you.
All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Kim Anitsberger. I am the executive director of the Lamoille Community House, which is a small seasonal shelter nestled in Hyde Park, Vermont. I'm also the co-chair of the Lamoille Valley Housing and Homelessness Coalition and the Lamoille board representative for the Vermont Coalition and Homelessness. I've been in my role for about 3 years and in the field for about 5. I've met hundreds of beautiful, valuable people that have been left behind by our systems of care, and it breaks my heart. I see our system of care as a series of nets stacked one above the other, with holes progressively getting smaller in the descending levels. The nets near the top have big holes, intended only to catch those with an implied larger value. As people fall, as they face challenges in their lives, the nets start to catch some people, but allow others to fall through. As the person keeps falling net after net, the holes being just not quite small enough to stop them from falling again, they end up at the last net, the one with the tightest stitch in the smallest holes, hanging just a few feet above the ground, shelters. But even shelter nets have holes, meaning sometimes we aren't equipped to catch everyone, and people end up bouncing from shelter to shelter, desperately seeking a net that will catch them, doing what they can to survive along the way, and ultimately end up outdoors. They've fallen through every net that we, as a system, have set up to catch them. These nets that we've set up are there to keep people safe, cared for, and alive. At least that's what we hope for. That's what we intended, but it's not always the reality. The reality is that these nets, our systems of care, are inequitable and inadequate. Our country and state were founded in white supremacy, and the systems we work within still operate under those intentions, which means we determine people's value based on their race, class, gender, and abilities. In order to make any change, we need to first recognize how our cultural thinking might have influenced prior decision makers, and then make a commitment to ending that cycle of thinking. Not doing so only perpetuates a system that is created to oppress those living in poverty, and there's no progress within that system. I am a strong believer that no one person is to blame for their homelessness. People are homeless because our systems don't catch them when they fall. And dare I say, sometimes our systems even push people down. Think of things like the benefits cliff, or a lengthy, almost impossible disability application, or housing disparities among our BIPOC community. Our systems were created by those who benefit from people being stuck in poverty. The fact that we have record numbers of people experiencing homelessness is not a surprise. It's a result of a system that benefits from the oppression of certain groups. We need a system that will be accountable and responsible for fixing these issues. Right now, our systems turn to shelter providers to provide a life-saving service for people who have no other options, since every other net was made to avoid catching them. Shelters are asked to provide these services with less funding than it takes to do the actual work. When homeless shelters are asked to leverage about 30% or more of our operating budgets every year, I have a hard time seeing that as an efficient use of our resources. We are providing a source that meets our vulnerable Vermonters' basic needs for survival. We are literally keeping people alive at the very least. We are providing a service that is needed because our system doesn't allow for everyone to be helped. We need to think about where the responsibility for funding our programs lie. Most of our donations are $100 or less. Why is it the responsibility of medium to low income families to make sure the shelter's lights are on? The responsibility lies with the system that created the issue. It's not the fault of anyone here today that these systems are this way, but it is our responsibility to recognize that they are, be accountable for the results they've produced, and make decisions that support a better system of care. A step in that direction is fully funding shelter providers because they are providing a life-saving service. We also need better funding for service providers in related fields. When our local agencies providing housing counseling, housing retention, and other important case management services are underfunded, it impacts our shared clientele drastically. We have unsupported and burnt out case managers with unmanageably large caseloads, wait lists for our clients, and high turnover rates. This creates an instability for those we serve, which impacts their ability to make progress towards their goals, resulting in them staying in our system of care longer. As more people enter the system and not many are moving out, the problem worsens and snowballs for the case managers and the clients. Providing inadequate funding is not only disrespectful to the people on the ground doing the work, it's extremely harmful and dismissive to those that rely on the services. I see our unhoused population as an untapped resource with so much potential. The people I have met in my years of working in this field are some of the smartest, most resourceful, and giving people I've ever met. I can't imagine how much they might be able to contribute to our workforce, economy, and community wellness if they were given the opportunity, if they had just been allowed to be caught by the first net. We need to invest in this population. Our shelter had a house meeting recently where it was brought up that things didn't feel fair when it came to the upkeep and tidying of the shared spaces. The group worked together to create a new way of addressing chores that they all felt really good about. Receiving input from our shelter guests on how our shelter should run is so important. It tells our guests that we value their opinions and experiences, that we value them as people. This is the kind of thing I would love to pour more resources into. Program development informed by shelter guest feedback, staff training opportunities, better service provision, and enhanced collaboration with partner agencies. When we spend our valuable limited resources on fundraising in order to just keep our doors open, we are telling the people we serve that less than adequate attention and programming is what they deserve. Proper funding means an investment in this population, and more importantly, it's a decision that comes from the belief that these people have value. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? We appreciate your work and appreciate some of the larger things you brought up. Thank you. Okay, I think Jack's very helpful to us in letting us know that you're Robert Little from Rural Edge.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yeah.
So yes, good morning. My name is Robert Little. I'm the Director of Community Development with Rural Edge for the nonprofit housing organization for the Northeast Kingdom. And I also serve as the vice chair of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition. So you'll be seeing me again next week. So good to see you all. Good to see you, Senator Clark.
Yes, always a pleasure.
Yes. So first, I just want to thank you and your colleagues for the unprecedented transformational investment you have made in affordable housing. Since CARES Act and ARPA funds have been allocated, Rural Edge alone has brought on 74 new units, with another 132 either under construction or has all funding in place. Overall, we have 14 projects projected in our pipeline in the next 4 years. We are so proud of our accomplishments, and I'm here today to tell you that we're not done yet. In my role at Rural Edge, I oversee our communications, our advocacy, but also our resident services, including our SASH program. I know these days at the beginning of the legislative session I've been told like trying to drink from a fire hose. So I just want to set the tone by telling you some successes that we've had in the past year. In the spring of 2021, utilizing $2.3 million in VHCB homelessness relief funds, we were able to adapt the former Caledonia County Jail into 9 units of affordable housing in downtown St. Johnsbury, a property that, thanks to a postcard from back in the 1930s, we now call the Cherry Street Hotel. All the residents came from the local coordinated entry list. While we shared concerns that concentrating 9 households of 14 people coming from homelessness might cause some issues, this was not our first experience with it. In 2020, we housed 7 households totaling 27 people in St. Johnsbury using the same tenant selection process. And all of those households are still housed today.
That's great.
This gives us real pride in what we do. And the stories give us even more pride. So for example, Angel, a young single parent, lost her job, survived a complicated pregnancy, and was staying with her newborn in a cramped mobile home park in Derby with relatives with whom she felt unsafe for her daughter. When tensions boiled over, Angel took her little girl and left. They stayed at the Fairbanks Inn in St. Johnsbury, just one of 3 places that the unsheltered population can go in a time of crisis currently in the Northeast Kingdom. In May of 2022, she signed a lease at her new apartment in Cherry Street. And here's the quote that just is so telling to me. When asked about her apartment, Angel said, "I'm afraid to be happy at times because I've had so much happen to me. But I feel comforted in that we have a stable place to live." That's the story. We house populations that have undergone tremendous trauma. So we see it as our responsibility as a landlord to give people not just a place to live, but a place to thrive in their housing. So we do that in a few different ways. We've utilized our partnership with Northeast Kingdom Community Action, or NECA, to have a dedicated staff member. She's based out of our Cherry Street property, and what she does is she works with private landlords and us to work with the populations that have moved in from homelessness with the goal of housing retention through regular check-ins, service coordination, and education about how to be a good tenant. Probably some education I could have used a few years ago. This position complements Rural Edge's own resident support specialist, who we hired just 6 months ago to operate an eviction prevention program. This was funded, thank you, Sarah, through Emergency Rental Assistance Program funds with the goal of housing retention. So what she does is she gets referrals from our property managers whenever there's a lease violation or a notice to quit, and her job is to follow up with that tenant within 7 days to come up with a corrective action plan and to follow up with that person regularly to make sure that it's getting done.
That's great.
So by doing that, this person has worked with 14 households so far. In 6 months, none of the people that she's worked with are even close to eviction. So after 60 days, if there's no escalation, we count it as an eviction prevented and we celebrate it. And so far we've seen 4 evictions prevented, no escalation. It's just amazing work. So while these successes give us really great hope, there's no shortage of challenges that housing providers continue to face when housing those previously experiencing homelessness. Funding for wraparound services is still not adequate to meet the need. And ultimately, if somebody disengages from their social service provider or fails to follow up with our services,
it always falls on us. We're the ones who aren't getting paid rent. We're the ones who are dealing with the behavioral issues. It ultimately falls on us because we have that legal contract to house this person. And while we never want to proceed with eviction, and we do everything we can, as I told you, to try to keep people housed, if somebody's not willing to engage with us, they're continually not paying their rent, we have no choice but to proceed with eviction, something that we never want to do, but unfortunately has happened a little bit. So while we acknowledge that there are those continued challenges, there's still great hope for the upcoming year. You probably heard that Senator Sanders got a federal appropriation for 1 year for a mental health pilot for the SASH program. This will allow Borough Edge to have 2 part-time clinicians, one north, one south, to work with our tenants to address those mental health issues, both preventative and in time of crisis, which is so needed because mental health, as we all know, has gone way down during the pandemic. So this is very much needed. So I think the main point is this, I want to keep this short. As the housing provider, we see the need for wraparound services, those supportive services. We see those of equal importance as the funding for the housing itself. That because there's no point in housing people if you're going to have to turn around in 6 months and evict them because they don't have everything they need to thrive. So they're equal importance. That said, my executive director would probably get upset with me if I didn't say that funding for housing is still of great importance, right? The number of new units that we have that in our pipeline is so impressive, but we need that continued funding through the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, both in remaining ARPA and in general funds. We need that funding to keep up with the pace of development. Further investing funds to bring more shelter capacity is of great importance, as in the Northeast Kingdom, there is no congregate shelter option in the entire Northeast Kingdom. None. Sarah's working on it with our partners. I'm working on it. We're all working on it, but we're working together, and it's so important to know that. I know Sarah, like we work together, we know all this. Not very often, and one of the beautiful things about Vermont is that housing providers and the Agency of Human Services work together closely.
Yeah, no, it is one of the great things, but not St. J. I didn't realize St. J didn't have a.
Not yet. We're working on it.
What's your biggest barrier right now? A location?
Zoning.
Zoning. Thank you for saying that.
Zoning,
Well,
Senator.
Yeah.
We have in zoning in St. John's Bury right now, it's the only place for a congregate shelter is in the hospital district, which is 2 miles plus out of town with no sidewalk access to the downtown. That's the only place you can have it. So I will send you an email later. I will make sure you have my, I'll make sure you have my information so that as you continue those deliberations with zoning reform, I mean, that's exclusionary zoning. That's not helpful. While it's close to the hospital and I understand the rationale behind that,
yeah, but that's
you're basically taking people out of their community. And there are plenty of places that don't have to be right in the center of the downtown necessarily, but give people their privacy, but still give them that access to their downtown.
Yeah.
That's really, really important. So you're going to be hearing things like from the nonprofit housing developers. You probably already got the memo asking for $175 million in various sources of funding for FEHIP and DHCB, all of that. That's really important to help us bring these units online.
Yeah.
Great.
So again, we just want to be a continued resource to you because housing, yes, housing helps decrease homelessness, but those supportive services are just as necessary. So I think I just want to leave you with our housing situation. We call it a crisis. I think we can equally look at it as an opportunity. I came in here, the first thing I said to you is we're not done yet. So everything that you do that puts those funds in there to set us up for the future, everything that you're doing, be it zoning reform, funding for housing, funding for supportive services, the message you're sending to Vermonters is we're not done yet either. So I just want to thank you for your time, and I want this to be the beginning of a conversation throughout the session.
Thanks, Robert. The Kingdom is lucky to have you doing that work.
Thank you very much.
RNG.
I've got a wonderful director who keeps me in check, but I love coming here and being able to speak with you and just continue that conversation because I know things are so different all around the state, but the Northeast Kingdom has some particular issues, and I want to make sure that we're advocating for not just our tenants, but all those various needs that are out there.
Absolutely. Much
Thanks.
appreciated.
Thank you so much.
Terrific.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Michael Redmond, you are our last witness today.
Thank you. Thank you,
the Upper
Senator.
Valley.
And greetings to Senator Clarkson. Sorry I'm not there today. I do have some staff who are out there right now, probably on the steps for part of the events of Homelessness Awareness Day. My name, for the record, is Michael Redmond, and I'm the Executive Director of the Upper Valley Haven, located in Hartford. I also serve on the board of the Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness and the steering committee of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition. I've been asked to be in the anchor position in our time for testimony today, Homelessness Awareness Day. My thanks to my colleagues who preceded me. They were eloquent and passionate, describing the work their agencies perform each day. I think they were also modest about their own achievements over the past 3 years in keeping their heads up and eyes down simultaneously, which is hard, inspiring their teams, keeping their staffing in place so shelters could stay open, taking on new challenges and programs to meet the moment. I also want to give thanks to the people with experience of being without a home that you heard from. Their voices are essential, and I want to believe that their description of their life experiences will stay with you for some time. I also want to pay tribute to the leaders and the rank and file in state government. I start with the governor and you, the legislature, for learning to be bold in vision and opportunistic in efforts to keep us healthy and productive, and believing that tomorrow will emerge stronger and united. With the entire body of administrative agencies also deserve praise, I want to single out our partners at the Agency for Children and Families, the Office of Economic Opportunity and Economic Services Division, which we work with most closely through funding for the shelters, supportive housing, transitional housing, and temporary housing. In its support for the shelter network and the people we serve who are homeless and at risk of homelessness, these agencies were creative, dedicated, tireless, understanding, and open to hearing and taking necessary actions when there were ways we believed they could do better. So here we are. You heard testimony from Sarah earlier of the challenges ahead of us all, still with over 1,300 households in motels through the transitional housing program, which is scheduled to end on March 31st. Almost 500 households in the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program, some there only through adverse weather conditions, and another 500 people in emergency shelters. The point in time count of people experiencing homelessness next week will likely find continued high levels never experienced in Vermont prior to the pandemic. And we need to ask at this moment, and this is the one question I hope you will remember, is everything being done to avoid drastic consequences when the transitional housing program ends on March 31st? I know you'll be focusing on that going forward with the agencies and the providers of services that are supporting the households in those motels. Some basics you'll continue to hear, and I don't know if there are new members on your committee, but they're worth repeating. Others who have been there for a while already know them. Shelters save lives. The solution to homelessness is more housing that is affordable, with services tailored to help people get and keep housing, with connections to employment and health services especially. That is the three-legged stool. You have an important role in all of this. Fortunately, after years of significant underfunding, there's a wave of funding and pipeline for new housing that has been rolling out and that will continue. The governor has announced his wish to see barriers to building more housing contained in state and local regulations removed. He even mentioned Hartford in his inaugural address. Some of that certainly involves legislation and administrative rules. I encourage you to be bold and laser focused on that issue. And while COVID funding has filled that pipeline for now, we need to think about a future, a few years from now, when those funds will have been expended and the problems will be far from solved, so making a big dent in them. More immediately, I ask you to focus on shelters and services, the world in which I work. The work that saves lives and gives people hope. This is the work that you've heard my colleagues speak about so eloquently this morning. I'd like to focus on one issue that is most vexing to us, staffing at this time. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, have to have somebody here all of the time. It's become increasingly challenging to find enough staff to do this essential work. And the staff that have been doing this very hard work can lose faith that there's a future for them. One direct way to change this is through providing the funding that will allow us to pay a living wage, the housing wage, to the people who are actually helping our guests provide access to housing. As we look to expand shelter beds in the state, that also requires the investment in ongoing funding for additional staff, services, and overhead costs. When ACD asks for the funds you need to do the job you want them to do, please listen and support the budgets that are needed. Lastly, it was almost 6 years ago to the day that the roadmap to end homelessness was submitted to multiple committees in the legislature by then AHS Deputy Secretary Paul Dragon. $40,000 was appropriated and additional matching funding was secured to complete this report by engaging the Corporation for Supportive Housing national experts in this field. I read it again in preparation for this meeting. The analysis of the status of the problem, then recent history of addressing the problem, and recommendations for future actions have held up remarkably well. I encourage you, especially those of you, if there are, new members in the legislature, to read this report. Much has been accomplished. The increase in supportive housing programs through family supportive housing and SASH, the targeted programs to individuals with mental health conditions, has been tremendous. The use of community-based solutions to draw together partnerships between affordable housing developers and organizations providing services, such as the Haven, to people who are unhoused has also been tremendous, though differing around the state. The A New Way Home project is another great example of the imagination of the state and taking advantage of opportunities and bringing together organizations that are creating new housing to provide services. The build out of the coordinated entry program and homeless management information system, those details, but has now been hardwired the practices that are fair and equitable and provide data for analysis that didn't exist before. Very important. And the AHS OEO is doing great work in this whole effort. The recommendation to increase in affordable rental housing with goals for targeting homeless populations that was at 15% has been well surpassed. I understand it's more closer to 25% during the pandemic. And that is tremendous to helping to bring down the numbers, though we still see they are quite high. I would ask that after 6 years of that report being submitted, it is a good time to acknowledge not only what has been accomplished, but also what remains undone. What was missed then and remains important now? The focus of the report was on a lot of the assessment of the homelessness system, but the problem is broader than that. What have we learned that we should emphasize and invest in? Should we undertake a new project to revise the priorities and ideas of this roadmap so that we have a map that is speaking to the issues of today and the challenges of today and the opportunities and what we have built? I encourage you to think about that. But here are some of my own thoughts. We should continue and increase opportunities for supportive housing with case management services to include more individuals and not only those with diagnosed mental health conditions. The new state Medicaid plan provides the opportunity to take on this expansion of supportive housing, but the state will have to provide matching funds. The report was silent on the changes needed at the state and local levels that hinder the development of affordable housing, workforce housing, and shelters. These regulatory barriers must be removed. Both incentives and penalties should be considered. Legal action is certain to follow with unknown consequences if we don't take this on at both the state and municipal levels. The report by 3 regional planning organizations in the Upper Valley called Keys to the Valley is a tremendous blueprint for how towns can encourage development while not losing their character, which is often said in these decisions that
Michael, you've been so patient with other folks testifying. I tried to give you, 5 full minutes.
Okay. Yep.
Maybe if you could give your final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up.
bulleted.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
That'll be really helpful.
Yeah.
Lunch now.
Okay. Thank you. Included in solutions around supply of housing, more focus on manufactured homes and tiny homes should be added to bring down the price points of adding new units of housing. A technical detail, but an important one. If there are opportunities to support changes in the fair market rent federal standards in high rent rural areas, that should be taken up. People are losing access to vouchers because they can't find apartments that are under the fair market rent. Additional funding for shelter expansion projects, upgrades, and more complete funding of shelter operations. Too much of our operating budgets to provide shelter need to be raised from private funds. Additional funding will help us hire and retain the staff who are dedicated to this work, but need to have better wages. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. We appreciate that. Good wrap up, and we appreciate your patience. And we will keep in touch, especially through Senator Clarkson. So
We need to, as we address the transitional housing program.
Yeah.
I think we're
yes,
really
this for many of us, this year in this committee, it was our first opportunity to hear about transitional housing, emergency housing, and homelessness, and hear that, you know, these issues have themes that are very broad, and we hope to address all of them with our upcoming bill that we will be spending the rest of the month and beyond working on. So we look forward to staying in touch with all of you, particularly your lead coalition partners that are in the State House who can keep flagging us. So thank you all. You're really, you know, doing the most basic work with people in crisis. That's at the foundation of how we keep our state together and make sure people have a chance at, I think as Robert said, you know, to enjoy happiness and to know that they deserve to do that. So we really appreciate the work this coalition does. We'll continue to hear from you, and thank you. Thank you for being here.